Marcus Thompson stepped off the tour bus in London with his designer sunglasses perched on his head and a smug expression that had become his trademark over the years. At 42, he had built a successful tech company in Silicon Valley, and his bank account reflected it. Everything he owned screamed expensive, from his Italian leather shoes to his custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Finally, some real culture, he announced loudly to his wife Sarah, who was busy taking photos of Big Ben. Not like those tourist traps we visited in Paris last week. His voice carried that particular tone of someone who believed money could buy not just things, but respect and superiority over others. Sarah rolled her eyes behind her camera. She had grown tired of Marcus's attitude during their European vacation, but she had learned to pick her battles carefully over their 15 years of marriage. Just try to enjoy yourself, Marcus. We're supposed to be relaxing. The couple joined their tour group as they made their way toward Buckingham Palace. Marcus walked with the confident stride of someone who owned every room he entered, his phone constantly buzzing with business calls that he answered loudly, showing off his importance to anyone within earshot. "Yeah, close that deal while I'm gone," he barked into his phone as they approached the palace gates. "I don't care if it's midnight in Tokyo. Money doesn't sleep, and neither should they if they want my business." The tour guide, a pleasant elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, began explaining the history of the palace and the significance of the royal guards. Marcus half listened while checking his stock portfolio on his phone, occasionally making dismissive comments about British traditions being outdated. As they reached the front of the palace, Marcus noticed the stoic royal guard standing perfectly still in his red uniform and tall black hat. The guard's face was expressionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead, completely ignoring the dozens of tourists snapping photos around him. "Look at this guy," Marcus said loudly, nudging another tourist. "Standing there like a statue. What a waste of taxpayer money. In America, we put our military to real use." Mrs. Patterson politely explained that the royal guards were highly trained soldiers with distinguished service records, not just ceremonial figures. But Marcus was already walking closer to the guard, his phone out and recording. "Hey, buddy," Marcus called out to the guard, waving his hand in front of the soldier's face. "You in there? This is 2024, not 1824. Time to get a real job." The guard remained perfectly still, trained to ignore such behavior from tourists. His discipline was remarkable, not even a muscle twitching despite Marcus's increasingly obnoxious behavior. Sarah felt embarrassed and tried to pull her husband away. "Marcus, please. You're making a scene." But Marcus was just getting started. He had spotted an opportunity to show off, and his ego wouldn't let him walk away. A small crowd had gathered, some filming with their phones, which only encouraged him more. "Watch this," he announced, pulling out a $100 bill from his wallet. "I bet I can make this guy move. Everyone has a price." He waved the money in front of the guard's face, making jokes about British people needing American money to survive. When that didn't work, he started taking selfies, pushing closer and closer to the guard, trying to get the perfect shot for his social media accounts. The other tourists began to look uncomfortable. Some shook their heads disapprovingly, while others whispered among themselves about the rude American. Mrs. Patterson approached Marcus and politely asked him to step back and show respect for the guard and British traditions. "Respect?" Marcus laughed loudly. "Lady, I've probably paid more in taxes this year than this guy makes in a decade. I think I deserve a little entertainment for my money." That's when Marcus made his biggest mistake. Frustrated that his money and attitude weren't getting the reaction he wanted, he decided to escalate the situation. He reached out and poked the guard's chest with his finger, still recording with his other hand. "Come on, tin soldier. Do something. Earn your paycheck." The poke wasn't hard, but it was deliberate and disrespectful. The guard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his training held firm. He remained motionless, though those who looked closely could see the slight tension in his shoulders. Marcus, emboldened by what he saw as weakness, poked again, this time harder. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or should I say, Queen got your tongue?" Sarah was mortified. She could see the other tourists' disapproving stares and hear their muttered comments about ugly Americans abroad. She grabbed Marcus's arm more forcefully this time. "That's enough, Marcus. We're leaving now." But Marcus shrugged her off. He was enjoying the attention and the feeling of power over someone who couldn't fight back. In his mind, he was proving some point about American superiority and the absurdity of old-world traditions. "One more for the road," he announced, reaching out to knock the guard's tall black hat off his head. But as his hand moved toward the guard's hat, something unexpected happened. The guard's training kicked in with lightning speed. In one fluid motion, the soldier stepped slightly to the side, causing Marcus to stumble forward off balance. At the same time, the guard's hand shot out and firmly grabbed Marcus's wrist, stopping the attempted assault on his uniform. "Sir, step back immediately," the guard said in a crisp, authoritative voice that carried across the courtyard. "Any further interference with Her Majesty's Guard will result in your immediate detention." Marcus found himself face to face with a pair of steel-gray eyes that held no humor, no weakness, and no tolerance for his behavior. The guard's grip on his wrist was firm enough to make it clear that this was not a request. For the first time in years, Marcus Thompson was not in control of a situation, and the realization hit him like a cold wave. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, and every phone seemed to be pointed in his direction, capturing his moment of humiliation. The grip on Marcus's wrist felt like steel, and suddenly the Royal Guard didn't seem like just a tourist attraction anymore. The soldier's presence commanded respect in a way that Marcus's money never could. The American businessman felt his face flush red as he realized dozens of people were recording his humiliation. "Let go of me," Marcus stammered, trying to pull his wrist free. "Do you know who I am? I'm an American citizen. I have rights." The guard's expression remained unchanged, but his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Sir, you have interfered with a member of Her Majesty's Guard in the performance of his duties. You will step back to the designated tourist area immediately, or you will be detained for assault on a crown servant." Marcus looked around desperately for support, but found none. The other tourists were shaking their heads in disgust, and even Sarah had stepped away from him, her face burning with embarrassment. Mrs. Patterson, the tour guide, was already on her radio, likely calling for additional security. "This is ridiculous," Marcus protested, finally pulling his hand free when the guard released him. "I barely touched you. In America, we call this freedom of expression. In Britain, we call it assault," came a new voice from behind him. Marcus spun around to see two London Metropolitan Police officers approaching. One was a tall, serious-looking man with graying hair, while the other was a younger woman with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Both looked thoroughly unimpressed with the scene before them. "I'm Sergeant Williams," the older officer announced. "This is Constable Davies. We've received reports of a disturbance involving harassment of a royal guard." "Harassment?" Marcus's voice pitched higher. "I was just taking pictures. This is a tourist attraction, isn't it? I'm a paying customer here." Sergeant Williams pulled out a notepad while Constable Davies positioned herself where she could see both Marcus and the growing crowd of onlookers. The sergeant's pen was already moving as he began taking notes. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," Williams said calmly, "and I need you to explain your actions toward the guardsman." Marcus fumbled for his passport, his hands shaking slightly from anger and adrenaline. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. I'm Marcus Thompson, CEO of Thompson Tech Solutions in California. I'm here on vacation with my wife. We're spending thousands of dollars in your country. Your profession and spending habits don't give you the right to assault members of the Royal Guard, sir," Constable Davies interjected. "We have multiple witnesses who saw you deliberately make physical contact with the guardsman, despite being asked to maintain distance." Sarah finally stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Officers, I'm his wife. I'm so sorry about this. He's been under a lot of stress lately, and he doesn't usually act like this." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it wasn't true. Marcus had been acting exactly like this throughout their entire vacation, and increasingly so over the past few years. His success had gone to his head, making him believe that money and status put him above common courtesy and respect for others. The Royal Guard, still standing at attention, spoke clearly and professionally to the officers. The gentleman made repeated verbal harassment, waved money in my face, and then made deliberate physical contact by poking my chest twice, despite warnings from his tour group. He then attempted to remove my hat when I warned him to step back. Sergeant Williams nodded as he continued writing. "Right. Mr. Thompson, under Section 1 of the Prevention of Crime Act, I'm detaining you for assault on a crown servant. You'll need to come with us to answer some questions." "Wait, what?" Marcus's face went pale. You can't arrest me for that. I'm an American citizen. I want to call my embassy. You're not under arrest yet, sir, but you are being detained for questioning, Williams explained patiently. You have the right to contact your embassy, and you have the right to legal representation. However, touching a member of the Royal Guard without permission is taken very seriously here. The crowd of tourists had grown substantially, and phones were still recording from every angle. Marcus could already imagine the headlines, entitled American CEO Assaults British Royal Guard. His company's stock price would tank, his board would be furious, and his carefully crafted public image would be destroyed. Please, he said, his voice losing its earlier arrogance. Can't we work something out? I'll apologize. I'll make a donation to charity. Whatever you want. Constable Davies stepped closer. Sir, this isn't about money. You showed disrespect to one of our finest soldiers and to British traditions. Actions have consequences regardless of your bank account. Mrs. Patterson approached the officers with her radio in hand. I have the entire incident recorded on the tour company's cameras, she said. The gentleman was warned multiple times about appropriate behavior, and he chose to ignore those warnings. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. His phone was buzzing constantly with calls from his office, probably wondering why he'd missed his scheduled conference calls. Sarah was crying quietly, and he could see the disappointment and shame in her eyes. Look, I made a mistake, he said, trying a different approach. I got carried away. I'm sorry. Can't we just forget this happened? Sergeant Williams closed his notepad and looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thompson, if everyone could just forget their mistakes by saying sorry, we wouldn't need laws or consequences, would we? You chose to disrespect not just this guardsman, but the institution he represents and the country you're visiting. The Royal Guard finally spoke again, his voice calm and measured. Sir, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq before being selected for ceremonial duties. I've faced enemy fire and protected my fellow soldiers. I stand here to honor the crown and represent the finest traditions of British military service. Your money cannot buy you the right to mock that service or lay hands on a British soldier. Marcus felt smaller with each word. Here was a man who had actually risked his life for his country, who had earned his position through courage and sacrifice, being lectured by someone whose biggest challenge was quarterly earnings reports. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in. He was potentially facing criminal charges in a foreign country. His humiliation was being broadcast across social media, and his reputation was in ruins, all because he couldn't control his ego long enough to show basic respect to another human being. As the officers prepared to escort him away for questioning, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in a nearby window. For the first time in years, he didn't like what he saw. The police station was nothing like the glamorous crime dramas Marcus had seen on television. The interview room was small, sterile, and uncomfortable, with fluorescent lights that seemed designed to make everyone look guilty. Marcus sat across from Sergeant Williams and Constable Davies, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his confidence completely shattered. Let's go through this again. Mr. Thompson, Williams said, consulting his notes. You were warned by your tour guide about appropriate behavior around the Royal Guards, correct? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his plastic chair. Yes, but I thought she was just being overly cautious. I mean, they're just standing there for show, right? No, sir, they are not just for show, Davies interjected sharply. These are active duty soldiers with extensive combat experience. The ceremonial duties are an honor earned through exceptional service. Would you poke a soldier in America? That's different, Marcus mumbled, though he couldn't explain why. Williams leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, we've reviewed the video footage from multiple sources. You made deliberate physical contact with Guardsman Fletcher not once but twice, despite clear warnings. You also attempted to remove his headgear, which could be considered assault with intent to humiliate. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Assault with intent to humiliate? That sounds serious. It is serious, Davies confirmed. In British law, assault doesn't require injury. Unwanted physical contact is sufficient. And given that this involved a member of Her Majesty's Guard, the Crown Prosecution Service takes these matters very seriously indeed. Marcus's phone had been buzzing constantly until he finally turned it off. He knew his assistant would be fielding calls from investors, board members, and reporters. The story was already spreading across social media with hashtags like Josh Entitled Tourist and Respect the Guard. What happens now? He asked quietly. Well, you have several options, Williams explained. We can process this as a formal charge, which would mean court appearances, potential fines, and a criminal record. Or, given that this is your first offense and you're a foreign visitor, there might be alternative approaches. Marcus looked up hopefully. Alternative approaches? Davies consulted her paperwork. The Crown Prosecution Service sometimes allows for restorative justice in cases like this. It would involve a formal apology, community service, and a substantial charitable donation to a military charity. But it's not guaranteed and it would still be on your record. I'll do anything, Marcus said quickly. The donation, the apology, whatever it takes. It's not just about what you'll do, Mr. Thompson, Williams said seriously. It's about understanding why your actions were wrong. Do you understand the significance of what happened today? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I thought I was just having some fun with a tourist attraction. But that guard, he's a real soldier, isn't he? He's served in wars. Guardsman Fletcher is a decorated veteran, Davies confirmed. He was wounded in Helmand Province while saving 3 fellow soldiers from an IED explosion. He carries shrapnel in his leg to this day. Those ceremonial duties, they're one of the highest honors in the British Army. Marcus felt sick. I had no idea. That's the problem, Williams said. You didn't bother to find out. You saw someone you thought was beneath you and decided to humiliate him for your own entertainment. That says something about your character, doesn't it? Meanwhile, back at their hotel, Sarah was dealing with her own crisis. The story had exploded across social media, and reporters were already calling their room. She'd been married to Marcus for 15 years, and she'd watched his success gradually transform him from the ambitious but kind man she'd fallen in love with into someone she barely recognized. Her phone rang again. It was Marcus's business partner, David. Sarah, please tell me this video isn't real. David's voice was strained. Please tell me Marcus didn't actually assault a British soldier on camera. I wish I could, Sarah replied, her voice thick with tears. He's been getting worse, David. The money, the success, it's changed him. He thinks he can treat people however he wants because he's rich. Our stock is down 12% since the video went viral. David said grimly, the board is in emergency session. Sarah, they're talking about removing him as CEO. Back at the police station, Marcus was learning about the full consequences of his actions. Sergeant Williams had just finished explaining that even if charges were dropped, the incident would still appear on background checks for visa applications and business dealings. Your behavior today has been seen by millions of people worldwide, Davies explained. The Royal Guard has become a symbol of dignity and restraint under pressure. You've become a symbol of entitled tourist behavior. That's not something that just goes away. Marcus buried his head in his hands. My company, my reputation, everything I've worked for. Should have thought of that before you decided to humiliate a war veteran, Williams said without sympathy. Actions have consequences, Mr. Thompson. Money doesn't shield you from that truth. There was a knock on the door, and a junior officer entered with a message for Williams. After a brief conversation, Williams turned back to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, I have some news. Guardsman Fletcher has agreed to meet with you if you're willing. He doesn't have to do this, mind you, but he believes it might help you understand the impact of your actions. Marcus looked up, surprised. He wants to meet with me? After what I did? That's the kind of man he is, Davies explained. Professional, disciplined, and more forgiving than you probably deserve. The question is, are you ready to face him like a man and take responsibility for your actions? Marcus nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he was about to face someone he couldn't buy, intimidate, or dismiss. Someone who had earned respect through service and sacrifice, rather than demanding it through wealth and status. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Marcus would spend the night in police custody, not because he was under arrest, but because the media attention made it unsafe for him to return to his hotel. Reporters were already camped outside, and the story was making headlines from London to Los Angeles. As he was led to a holding cell, Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in a mirror. The man staring back looked older, smaller, and more frightened than he'd ever seen himself. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thompson was facing consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. The morning sun filtered through the small window of the police station meeting room as Marcus waited nervously for Guardsman Fletcher to arrive. He'd barely slept on the uncomfortable cot in the holding cell, his mind racing with thoughts of his crumbling empire and the consequences of his actions. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the disappointed faces of the tourists and the steady, unwavering gaze of the guard he had humiliated. Sarah had visited early that morning, bringing him a change of clothes and some devastating news. The board of directors had voted unanimously to suspend him pending an investigation into the incident. 3 major clients had already canceled contracts, and the company's stock had continued to plummet overnight. "The employees are embarrassed, Marcus," Sarah had told him quietly. "They're having to defend working for a company whose CEO assaulted a war veteran on camera. Some of them are talking about quitting." When Guardsman Fletcher entered the room, Marcus was struck by how different he looked in civilian clothes. Gone was the imposing red uniform and tall black hat. Instead, he wore simple jeans and a polo shirt, but somehow his presence still commanded respect. He walked with a slight limp that Marcus hadn't noticed the day before. "Mr. Thompson," Fletcher said, extending his hand. "I'm James Fletcher." Marcus stood awkwardly and shook the offered hand, surprised by the firm but cordial grip. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know you didn't have to." Fletcher took a seat across from Marcus, his posture straight despite being off duty. "I wanted to help you understand something that I don't think came across yesterday. When you see me in uniform, you're not just seeing James Fletcher. You're seeing every British soldier who ever served, every family that sacrificed for their country, and every tradition that keeps our nation strong." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I never thought of it that way." "I just saw a tourist attraction," Fletcher finished. "A prop for your entertainment." "I understand that. Many visitors don't realize what the uniform represents, but when you put your hands on me, you weren't just disrespecting one soldier. You were disrespecting every man and woman who wore this uniform before me." Fletcher pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo of a younger version of himself in military fatigues, standing with a group of soldiers in what looked like a desert environment. "This was taken in Afghanistan 3 years ago," Fletcher explained. "The man next to me is Corporal Williams. He died 2 days later when our convoy hit an IED. The man on my other side is Sergeant Martinez. He lost both legs in the same explosion. They were heroes, Mr. Thompson. Real heroes." Marcus stared at the photo, seeing the genuine camaraderie and brotherhood between the young soldiers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "When I stand guard at the palace, I'm not just representing the crown," Fletcher continued. "I'm honoring their memory. I'm showing the world that British soldiers stand firm no matter what. When you tried to make me move, to break my discipline for your amusement, you were asking me to dishonor their sacrifice." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't understand." Fletcher leaned forward slightly. "But that's just it, isn't it? You didn't care enough to understand. You saw someone you thought couldn't fight back, and you decided to use them for your own entertainment. That tells me something about your character." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You're right. I've been acting like everyone exists for my benefit. Like my money makes me better than other people. But you served your country. You saved lives. What have I ever done except make money?" "Money isn't evil, Mr. Thompson," Fletcher said thoughtfully. "But what you do with it, how you treat people because of it, that matters. I've met wealthy people who use their success to lift others up. And I've met people with nothing who have hearts full of gold. Your bank account doesn't determine your worth as a human being." Fletcher showed Marcus another photo, this one of him in his dress uniform receiving a medal. "This is the day I was decorated for the action that saved my mates. You know what I was thinking about during the ceremony? I was thinking about a teacher I had in primary school, Mrs. Henderson. She taught us that real strength isn't about being the biggest or the richest. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." "The shrapnel in your leg," Marcus said quietly. "That happened when you saved those soldiers?" Fletcher nodded. "The explosion threw me about 10 meters. I woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. The doctors said I might never walk normally again, but I was one of the lucky ones. I got to come home." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing everything Fletcher had told him. Finally, he looked up and met the soldier's eyes. "What can I do? How can I make this right?" "That depends on what you've learned," Fletcher replied. "Do you understand why your actions were wrong, or are you just sorry because you got caught?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Both, if I'm being honest. I am sorry I got caught because it's destroying everything I've built. But I'm also genuinely ashamed of how I acted. You didn't deserve that treatment." "No one deserves that treatment." Fletcher nodded slowly. "That's a start. Real change doesn't happen overnight, Mr. Thompson. It's a choice you have to make every day, in every interaction you have with other people. The police mentioned something about restorative justice, Marcus said hopefully, a way to avoid formal charges. Yes, I've agreed to support that option, Fletcher confirmed, but it comes with conditions. A formal apology, not just to me but to the British people, community service working with veterans organizations, and a substantial donation to Help for Heroes, a charity that supports wounded servicemen and women. Marcus nodded eagerly. Whatever it takes. I'll do all of that. There's one more thing, Fletcher said seriously. I want you to meet some of the veterans I work with. Men and women who've sacrificed everything for their country and now struggle to find their place in civilian life. I want you to hear their stories and understand what real courage looks like. I'd be honored to meet them, Marcus replied, and for the first time, he truly meant it. Fletcher stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Thompson, you have a choice to make. You can go back to your old life and pretend this never happened, or you can use this experience to become a better man. The choice is yours. After Fletcher left, Marcus sat alone in the room, thinking about everything the soldier had said. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. I love you, but I don't like who you've become. I hope you find your way back to the man I married. For the first time in years, Marcus Thompson began to think about someone other than himself. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Buckingham Palace, and Marcus Thompson found himself in a place he never expected to be. A community center in East London, serving breakfast to homeless veterans. His expensive suits had been replaced by a simple apron and rolled-up sleeves, and his manicured hands were now rough from washing dishes and preparing meals. More eggs over here. Marcus, called out Tommy, a grizzled ex-soldier who had served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Tommy had been living on the streets for 2 years after struggling with PTSD and alcohol addiction, unable to hold down a job despite his military training and experience. Marcus hurried over with a fresh pan of scrambled eggs, still adjusting to being called by his first name instead of Mr. Thompson or Sir. The veterans he worked with had no interest in his wealth or status. They judged him solely on his willingness to show up and do the work. You're getting better at this, Tommy said with a slight grin. First day you burnt everything you touched. Thought we might have to call the fire brigade. Marcus smiled ruefully. I'd never actually cooked for anyone before. My wife always handled meals, or we just ate at restaurants. I didn't realize how much skill it takes to feed people properly. As part of his restorative justice agreement, Marcus was required to complete 200 hours of community service at veterans organizations. What had started as a legal obligation was slowly becoming something more meaningful. Every day, he met men and women who had given everything for their country, only to find themselves forgotten and struggling in civilian life. James Fletcher appeared in the kitchen doorway, no longer in his ceremonial uniform but wearing the casual clothes of a volunteer coordinator. Over the past weeks, he had become something Marcus never expected, a friend and mentor. How's our newest volunteer doing? Fletcher asked, watching Marcus efficiently serve portions of eggs and bacon. He's actually quite good at this now, said Margaret, an elderly volunteer who had been running the breakfast program for 5 years. Bit slow at first, but he listens and he learns. That's more than we can say for some volunteers. Marcus felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. These people had accepted him despite knowing exactly who he was and what he had done. The story of his humiliation had made international news, but here in this community center, he was just another pair of hands helping to feed people who needed a meal. After the breakfast service, Marcus sat with some of the veterans listening to their stories. There was David, who had lost his leg in Iraq and now struggled to find employers willing to hire a disabled veteran. Sarah, a former Army medic who couldn't sleep without nightmares about the wounded soldier she couldn't save. And Robert, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan but couldn't afford proper housing on his military pension. The thing that gets me, David was saying, is when people thank me for my service but then cross the street when they see me in my wheelchair. They want heroes in parades, but they don't want to deal with the reality of what war does to people. Marcus found himself really listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak as he had done for so many years. What do you need most? He asked. I mean really need, not just want politicians to say they'll help with. Robert laughed bitterly. Jobs, mate. Real jobs with real employers who see our skills instead of our disabilities. Housing that doesn't cost more than our entire pension. Mental health support that doesn't have a 6-month waiting list. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind. For the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of the old entrepreneurial energy, but directed towards something that mattered more than quarterly profits. That evening, Marcus returned to his hotel room to find Sarah waiting for him. She looked tired but hopeful, studying his face as if seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "You look different," she said softly. Happier somehow. Marcus sat down beside her on the bed. "I feel different. Sarah, I've been thinking about what David said today. About veterans needing real job opportunities. What if we could do something about that?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We? Thompson Tech Solutions could create a veterans hiring program," Marcus said excitedly. "Not just token positions, but real careers. We could partner with other tech companies, create training programs for veterans transitioning to civilian life, use our resources to make a real difference." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said carefully. "But what about the board? They suspended you, remember?" Marcus's face fell as reality crashed back down on him. "Right, I forgot for a moment. I might not even have a company to come back to." His phone buzzed with a call from David, his business partner. Marcus hesitated, then answered. "Marcus, thank God you picked up." David's voice crackled through the connection. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk about the board meeting tomorrow." "Let me guess," Marcus said wearily. "They're voting to remove me permanently." "Actually, no," David said, surprising him. "Something strange has happened. Remember that video of you getting arrested? Well, there's been a second video going viral. Someone filmed you at the Veterans Center yesterday, serving breakfast and talking with the homeless vets. It's getting just as much attention as the original incident." Marcus felt confused. "I don't understand." "People are calling it a redemption story," David explained. "The comments are mostly positive. They're seeing a different side of you, Marcus. The board wants to hear what you have to say before they make their final decision." After hanging up, Marcus stared out the hotel window at the London skyline. 3 weeks ago, he had been a successful but arrogant businessman who thought money could solve any problem. Now he was facing the potential loss of everything he had built, but he was also discovering something he had lost along the way: his humanity. Sarah took his hand. "Whatever happens with the company, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you're doing here. This is the man I fell in love with 20 years ago." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I just hope it's not too late to save what really matters." The next morning, Marcus prepared for the most important video conference of his life. But instead of his usual boardroom power suit, he wore a simple button-down shirt. And instead of speaking from his executive office, he sat in the community center kitchen where he had spent the past 3 weeks learning what it meant to serve others. The board members appeared on screen one by one, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Marcus's future hung in the balance, but for the first time in years, he knew exactly what he wanted to say. Marcus looked directly into the camera as the board members settled into their seats on the video call. Behind him, the community center kitchen hummed with the quiet activity of volunteers preparing for the lunch service. He had chosen this location deliberately, wanting the board to see where he had been spending his time and what he had learned. "Marcus," said Board Chairman Robert Chen, his voice formal and cautious. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this situation is unprecedented. We've never had to deal with a CEO whose personal conduct created such a public relations crisis." "I understand, Robert," Marcus replied, "and I take full responsibility for putting the company in this position. But I hope you'll give me a chance to explain what I've learned and what I want to do going forward." Board member Jennifer Walsh, who had always been skeptical of Marcus's aggressive leadership style, spoke first. "Marcus, we've seen the videos of you working at the Veterans Center. Some people are calling it a publicity stunt. How do we know this isn't just damage control?" Marcus had expected this question, because if this were just publicity, I would have hired a professional PR firm and staged something in a boardroom, not spent 3 weeks washing dishes and scrubbing floors in a community center in East London. "Jennifer, you've known me for 8 years. When have I ever done anything that didn't directly benefit the bottom line?" "That's exactly our concern," interjected board member Michael Torres. "Your behavior in London suggests a pattern of poor judgment. How do we trust you to make sound business decisions if you can't control your personal conduct?" Marcus took a deep breath. You're absolutely right to question my judgment. For the past 5 years, I've made decisions based on ego and profit, rather than values and responsibility. I thought success meant I was above basic human decency. I was wrong, and it nearly cost me everything that actually matters. He gestured to the activity behind him. The man I assaulted, guardsman James Fletcher, is here today. James, would you mind joining us? Fletcher appeared on camera, his bearing still military straight even in civilian clothes. The board members looked surprised at this unexpected addition to the call. Board members, Fletcher said formally, I wanted to speak on Mr. Thompson's behalf. What he did to me was wrong, and he has accepted full responsibility for his actions. But more importantly, he has spent the past month learning what it means to serve others instead of just serving himself. Jennifer Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Fletcher, with respect, how can we be sure this change is genuine and not just circumstantial? Fletcher smiled slightly. Because I've watched him scrub toilets for veterans who can't afford proper housing. I've seen him hold the hand of a former soldier having a panic attack. I've watched him write personal checks to cover medical expenses for people he'd never met before. That's not the behavior of someone putting on an act. David, Marcus's business partner, spoke up from his own video window. The question is, what does this mean for the company moving forward? Our stock is still down, we've lost clients, and employee morale is at an all-time low. Marcus nodded. David's right. I've damaged our company's reputation and I need to fix that. But I don't want to go back to the way things were. I want to build something better. He pulled out a folder filled with notes he'd been working on during his time at the Veterans Center. I'm proposing we launch the Thompson Veterans Initiative. We'll create a comprehensive program to hire and support military veterans, transitioning to civilian careers. Not just token positions, but real leadership roles with competitive salaries and growth opportunities. Board member Sarah Kim, the youngest member, looked intrigued. That's an admirable goal, Marcus, but how does it benefit the company financially? Veterans have skills most companies desperately need, Marcus explained. Leadership under pressure, ability to work in teams, adaptability and problem-solving capabilities. The tech industry has a notorious retention problem, but military personnel are trained for long-term commitment and loyalty. Fletcher nodded in agreement. The unemployment rate among disabled veterans is twice the national average, despite their skills and experience. Companies that successfully integrate veterans see improved performance across all metrics. Robert Chen looked thoughtful. It's an interesting proposal, Marcus, but we need more than good intentions. We need concrete business plans, budget projections, and measurable outcomes. I've been working on that, Marcus said, opening his laptop. Based on my research here, I estimate we could hire 50 veterans in the first year with a target of 200 within 3 years. The tax incentives alone would save us approximately $1.2 million annually, and early studies show veteran employees have 40% better retention rates than average hires. Jennifer Walsh still looked skeptical. And what about your leadership style, Marcus? You've been known for aggressive tactics and demanding unrealistic deadlines. How do we know you won't revert to your old behavior under pressure? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Honestly, Jennifer, you don't know that. I don't know that. Change is a choice you have to make every day, and I'll probably fail sometimes, but I'm asking for the chance to try. He turned slightly so the board could see Tommy, the homeless veteran who had been teaching him to cook, working quietly in the background. That man there served his country for 12 years and has been living on the streets for 2. He's taught me more about leadership in 3 weeks than I learned in my entire MBA program. Michael Torres spoke up. What exactly did he teach you? That real leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or having the biggest office, Marcus replied. It's about making sure everyone on your team has what they need to succeed. It's about taking responsibility when things go wrong instead of blaming others. It's about serving something bigger than yourself. The board members exchanged glances, having a brief sidebar conversation with their audio muted. Finally, Robert Chen unmuted his microphone. Marcus, we're willing to give you a second chance, but with conditions. You'll return as CEO on probation for 1 year. The Veterans Initiative will be funded as a pilot program. You'll work with an executive coach on leadership development, and you'll submit to regular performance reviews focused specifically on your management style and decision-making process. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. I accept all those conditions, Robert. Thank you for this opportunity. Don't thank us yet, Jennifer Walsh said firmly. Prove to us that this change is real. Show us that the man who assaulted a war veteran can become the leader this company needs. After the call ended, Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Fletcher placed a hand on his shoulder. Congratulations, Marcus. You've got your company back. Thanks to you, Marcus replied. James, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider joining Thompson Tech Solutions? I could use someone with your integrity to help launch the Veterans Program. Fletcher smiled. I'd be honored, but I have one condition. Name it. We do this right. No shortcuts, no publicity stunts, no treating veterans like charity cases. We create real opportunities for real people. Marcus stood and extended his hand to Fletcher. Partners? Fletcher shook his hand firmly. Partners. 6 months later, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at a veterans employment conference, no longer as an entitled tourist seeking entertainment, but as an advocate for those who had served their country. The Thompson Veterans Initiative had exceeded all expectations, hiring 78 veterans in its first 6 months and inspiring 12 other tech companies to launch similar programs. In the audience sat Tommy, now employed as a facilities manager at Thompson Tech Solutions, wearing a suit for the first time in years. Beside him sat David, the disabled veteran who had become the company's new director of accessibility services. And in the front row sat Sarah, Marcus's wife, who had watched her husband transform from someone she barely recognized back into the man she had fallen in love with. As Marcus began his speech about second chances and the true meaning of service, he caught sight of James Fletcher in the wings, now the program director for the Veterans Initiative. Fletcher gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. Marcus had learned that karma wasn't just about punishment for bad behavior. Sometimes, if you were willing to change, karma could also be about redemption, growth, and the chance to become the person you were always meant to be. The entitled tourist who had kicked a royal guard was gone, replaced by a man who understood that true success came not from what you could take from the world, but from what you could give back to it.